Welcome back, everyone. This is The Changelog, and I'm your host, Adam Stacoviak. This is episode 164, and on today's show, we're joined by Jack Luchek. Jack is back talking about Semantic UI again. We had him back on episode 106 almost a year and a half ago, and that was before Semantic UI was at 1.0. So that's pre 1.0. Well, now Semantic UI is at 2.0, so a lot of new changes, a lot of new additions, and we dive deep into a lot of the details about Semantic UI, but we also talked quite a bit with Jack about why and how, because Jack is doing Semantic UI full time. It's crazy. Gotta listen to this show. We have 3 awesome sponsors: CodeShip, Code School, and HipChat. Our first sponsor is CodeShip, a hosted continuous delivery service focusing on speed, security, and customizability. You can set up continuous integration in your app today in a matter of seconds and automatically deploy your code when your tests have passed. CodeShip supports your GitHub and Bitbucket projects, and you can get started today with CodeShip's free plan. Should you decide to go with a premium plan, you can save 20% off any plan you choose for 3 months by using our special code. That code is the Changelog Podcast. Again, the Changelog Podcast. Save 20% off any plan you choose for 3 months. Head to codeship.com/thechangelog to get started. And now on to the show. All right, everyone, we're back. We got a returning guest, Jack Luchek, the maker of Semantic UI. Back in episode 106, it was not me and Jared, right, Jared? That's a bummer, right? It was me and Andrew.
It's a good show. I listened to it today. It was an excellent show. But yes, bummer that I wasn't on there.
Yeah, but say la vida, Andrew. We miss you, buddy, but that was a good show as well. 106, that was October 5th, 2013. Almost a year and a half ago, just give or take a few days or something like that, seconds or whatever. But Jack, you're back. That was when you were here at 106. That was pre 1.0, and you've gone through 1.0. You got in touch with us on our ping repo on GitHub. We didn't end up syncing up, and now you're at 2.0. So, I mean, we missed 1.0, and now we're at 2.0. Semantic UI. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Talk to you guys.
And just to summarize a bit from the last show, Jared, feel free to step in and help me as well. But Jack, you're a language guy, right? You began more in the languages, and that's why you were really into the semantics of the web, and that's how you got into what you're doing with Semantic UI. Am I right?
Yep. So I studied cognitive science for my undergrad. I've always been sort of interested in the way that computer languages have been different than natural languages, and trying to sort of understand what a programming language would look like in the year 2100, or what programming languages are sort of, what directions are they moving? So that's obviously a very large, broad question. So I've tried to sort of scope it in the context of what we can do today to sort of change programming languages to sort of look at these features of future programming.
Very cool. And we've Jared, we lived through it, right? We talked about Zeldman at least once or twice on the show before, right? So web standards, that was a big deal. And obviously semantics matter. But as we start getting into the days today when people are sort of targeting the DOM, and it's a little less concern, not complete no concern, but a little less concerned about semantics, I'm wondering if we can bring that up at some point during the show. But maybe some more interesting things might be, Jack, what your situation is making this project.
Sure. So I think when you talked to me last, I've tried to replay in my head what I was doing in 2013. I was working at a startup previously called Quirky. If you don't know about Quirky, Quirky is a social invention company. People submit ideas for consumer products on their website, and then they convert them into real products and then share the proceeds with the inventor. So I left there a couple years ago. Semantic at the time was actually the code name of an internal redesign at Quirky, which sort of involved we're scaling the team from the company was 50 people at the time, and by the end of the year it was 150 people. So it was becoming a very different company overnight. And so for me, I was the lead front-end developer at the time. I was trying to sort of work out the idea of how you get a bunch of developers to code on a platform together without having to deal with, the idiosyncrasies of individual developer preference, naming conventions, and that kind of stuff. And so for me, what was really exciting was, going back to all this source material, which fascinated me when I was younger, about just sort of how people construct meaning. And so semantic UI is sort of a byproduct of that. It's a kind of a new understanding, not that new, I guess, but it's a unique understanding of how people should construct meaning through programming languages. And so it's a UI framework. The nuts and bolts is a bunch of things you can plug into your website that has drop downs and modals and all that kind of stuff. But the language behind it is based off of natural language. It uses relationships like plurality, noun modifier relationships, tense, things that are sort of constructs from natural languages, which sort of help people write non-prescriptive front-end code. So, everyone has their own way of calling something. And working with semantic UI sort of gives you a single language, which is maybe not objective, but more objective than, deciding at the spur of the moment what you want to call something. So I was working at Quirky when I left. Ben, the CEO there, was really wonderful. Also, Nathan Smith, the head CTO there, both were great, and they let me open source the project. I continued to work on it afterwards, and it was kind of one of those things where if you just finished a very grueling startup, and I kind of I took it easy. I traveled for a while. I went through Southeast Asia and all that that kind of stuff, nice. And I came out of it. And I was just sort of like, I still want to work on this. Like, this thing is still really important to me. And so I sort of went from there. Yeah.
So it sounds like this is a solo project. You may have some contributors, which I haven't even gone to the tab on GitHub yet, but I'm going to do that here right now so I don't put my foot in my mouth. But it sounds a bit like it's basically a solo project with 106 other people. I just looked at the contributors tab.
Yeah.
Well, 106 other people. You, so it's technically 104. Right?
So yeah, we have 800 translators. We have 100 contributors. Lots of issues open every day. It's great. It's one of those things where I realize the more you make something accessible, the broader a scope of people that will be helping you out. So every time that it becomes less like a programming language and more like something that people can understand, then you get these first-time GitHub contributors with no avatar, just leaving their first issue, which is actually literally my favorite thing, is because all the first-time contributors are probably the best. They have the most insight. They're they come from a perspective where they're from some other industry. They're from finance or they're from something else, and they want to make a website. So it's been really great. I think. For me, at least, the way I think about the project, I'm afraid of what it means to have too many cooks in the kitchen in terms of naming and language and conventions. So obviously, hundreds of pull requests, lots of contributors, but generally, I'm sure everyone has their own take on open source, but generally for me, I feel like the people who contribute are solving very particular issues. Yeah. Whereas road mapping and planning the scope of a project, it's very much the work of a few individuals. And so yeah, it's been great too with integrations. The whole ecosystem has changed since we last talked. It's Meteor, React, all these new technologies.
Yeah.
And people who know those things back very well and sort of having Angular integrations and having Meteor packages. It's been wonderful having the community help with that.
So we'll definitely dive a bit deeper into those two nuances there that you brought up. But for those who haven't listened to episode 106, which is at changelog.com/106, for those who haven't listened to that, can you give the one-liner about what Semantic UI is before we kind of dive deep into the what's, the whys, and the hows?
Yeah, sure. So naming is arbitrary. Semantic UI tries to give conventions based around natural language for parts of a website. So these aren't things that are part of the W3 spec. These are things that are part of sort of what the user community has, began to call things. So the idea of a sidebar, which is like an off-canvas navigation that appears, that concept didn't exist 10 years ago. The W3C can't really adapt to create a standard around that. And so my goal is to sort of create working standards for people who want to use these kind of components, but don't really want to create their own from scratch.
Yeah, so this is a lot, and maybe we'll get more into the details here as we go on, but I'm kind of going back. Jared, you said you went back and listened to 106, and I kind of purposely didn't. Either that or I'm lazy, one of the two, to go back and listen to it, because I was there, and you weren't, so there you go. But nonetheless, it seemed to me like Semantic UI was a bit more focused on being an implemented standard versus a framework itself. Is that easy? Is that somewhat the idea?
So just I'll go back into the linguistic roots of it here. This is what's personally interesting to me, and sort of why I'm obsessed with this idea. Is I think there's a fundamental difference between programming languages and natural languages, and I've been trying to sort of figure out in what aspects are programming languages better at constructing meanings, and what aspects are they worse at constructing meaning than natural languages. And so I think there's sort of a schism between meaning as constructed for computers, which involves databases, memory, different constructs for computers, and then there's meaning for people. And so the way I see it currently is that things that have to do with presentation, markup languages, are in a very unique position because they benefit most from these features of natural language. So humans are cognitive misers. We've spent between 50 and 100,000 years evolving language to use the least amount of sounds, to construct the most meaning. And so I'm fascinated by that. Like, you imagine if we had 100,000 years of computer science history, what that would mean. And so for me, it's trying to sort of work through what those features of natural language are that are useful and how they apply to programming languages. So in terms of presentation, websites are kind of like virtual scenes. They're things on a page. HTML is unique in the sense that it fits very well into this natural language system for describing things. It's like you might have 3 buttons on a page. There might be 3 large buttons. You have this concept of noun-modifier relationship. The largeness is shared between 3 buttons. Plurality, like you don't need to say there's a button and a large button and a large button. You understand very clearly. And in programming, we have this idea of classical inheritance, classes of things, but we don't necessarily break it down into the same nuance that natural language does, where words are classes of things. Like, to me, the idea of a word and a class is the same thing. But in English and in basically every natural language, there's an idea of significant word order. So, for instance, like if I say 3 large men versus, sorry, excuse me, this is a bad example. If I say, in terms of a website, a right-aligned, left-floated column, you understand that right refers to the alignment and left refers to where the column sits on the page. Whereas when we look at classes in HTML, everyone's used to just saying, well, left means this and right means this. Well, in English, it doesn't actually have a meaning. It only has meaning in context of other classes. And so this is what I'm really fascinated with, is sort of trying to reverse engineer this amazing system for constructing meaning, which we have in natural language. So things that are interesting in the library, it's like that exact example actually plays out, where certain class names have meaning only in relation to its position in terms of word order. So, for instance, you could have in the grid system a right-aligned, left-floated column, and it understands because you put right before the word aligned, you didn't mean right-floated, or you didn't mean right something else. You meant this particular concept. So yeah, it's kind of, obviously this is a very nascent field. Like, this is something that people will be expanding on for decades to come. But I'm really excited to sort of explore it more and try to really reverse engineer
Mhm.
language.
So you had roughly a year and a half since the previous show. I think you're at like 0.3 at the time to
Yeah,
watch it evolve a little bit. And so, could you take us from then to now, the evolution of semantic UI, and then kind of prognosticate a bit? Where do you see an end goal or a future end of the road looks like for a project like this?
sure. Um, so yeah, so when we talked last, the project was a pure CSS library. There was no pre-processing. Um, when I launched 1.0, one of the things I realized is that all these concepts, largeness, redness, are represented by variables. There's things that a user wants to define what largeness means to me or what redness means to me in the context of certain elements. And so I built this library out, and internally it ended up being, I don't know, 3,000 plus CSS variables. So very very large amount of things are um, uh, arbitrary in sort of definitions.
Right.
So I sort of worked back from that. I created an inheritance system where I was really fascinated with Sublime Text at the time. And it was one of those things that sort of came out of the ether. Like, I don't know if you remember when Sublime Text was coming out, but it was like, what the F is this? Like, this is insane. Who is this genius? And why does he have no Twitter followers? And I was fascinated by this concept. And he still doesn't. He just exists as this like mad genius that like doesn't want to be in the limelight. And it's obviously the best thing for text. I mean, there's other choices, Atom and so on, but it was so good that it was insane at the time. And for me, like I'm in terms of all types of art and literature, I'm into these people who sort of create without a concept of ego. They just do it because they have some idea. And he was one of my idols. And so I was looking at Sublime Text, and they have a very simple package system that just perfectly makes sense. It's there's three levels of inheritance. There's a user settings file. There's the package defaults, and then there's just the defaults for Sublime Text.
Hmm.
And it seems ridiculous, but I was just like, this is so easy. Like, why doesn't everything work off of this? And so I've looked at lots of different inheritance models for CSS, and Sass and less, everything is just like floating in this global namespace where it's like, if you define red later in the file, it actually like changes the red variable, anywhere else in that compilation. So it was a very basic sense of inheritance. And so I tried to sort of reverse engineer this Sublime Text inheritance model, and I came up with this system that works off of a default theme, a package theme, and then a site theme. And so you have library defaults, which are very neutral, just sort of how the UI components look. Then you have this concept of a package theme, which is like the hypothetical, as you're saying, the future of the library. If there's a package manager, then you can download, the GitHub button, let's say. That looks like a GitHub button. But then you have this third level, which is like, well, great, I downloaded that package, but I still have some things I want to customize. And so there's a third level, which is like a site theme. So it's basically like a user override. I've downloaded this theme, I've overridden the default theme, but I also want to add my own, my own colors or other variables. So I've launched 1.0. Was built off of these massive amount of theming variables, and this 3-level inheritance system. And I was happy with it, but it was also one of those things that feels like that Pyrrhic victory where you finish it and then you're like, I did it, and you do like your little dance in your room, and then you launch it out in the world and you just wait.
Yeah.
It's hard because these open source is one of those things where I feel like people don't discover it until they have a new project. They have they lift their heads up, they have the thing they're used to, and then you have to convince them of something they've never heard of, and it's a difficult proposition. And so 1.0 I was really happy with. Around that time, I actually went back to working on Semantic UI full time. So previous to that, I had and this is going back into the personal life, but I was working as a consultant for this magazine, The New Republic. So it was a great place to test out the ideas of what a framework like this would look like, and sort of helped evolve the standard for 1.0. But then sort of when 1.0 launched, I kind of went full tilt into the doing it for doing it aspect. And I sort of gave up the day job, and since then I've sort of been working on it full time, without pay, and just sort of enjoying it for the ideas. And so that's kind of leaves me where I am now.
In our pre-call, when Jared and I sort of prepare ourselves for the guests, he was telling me he went back and listened to that episode, and one thing that you did say was that you started working on it full time in that episode, and that Andrew and I just sort of just glazed over the idea that you just said that you were working on this open source project full time, and we just didn't dig in. So let's dig into that. So it astounds me. Let's preface this section, I guess, a bit with the fact that there's so much open source out there that you don't often understand as a user or someone who's just sort of determining what's out there at their fingertips available to use, what kind of sacrifice goes into making something happen, or the passion, like you've talked about, Jack, that you've got for language and simplicity and all these different things and how it's played into making Semantic UI what it is. And I feel like, there's a part of this show that can help foster and help explain some of the behind the scenes there on the motivations from you, the way that you've done it in the past year and a half, and it's at your leisure to share whatever personal details you want. But I think it's an interesting topic to figure out why you're doing it and how you're doing it without, a job.
Yeah, no, yeah. This is something for me. It's very philosophical. We live in a Western country. We have a very unique concept of what being subsisting is. And for me, I'm a programmer. I've been doing this, since college. And I just realized, what I actually need is much less than what I think I need. And the thing that really matters to me is ideas. And so I've sort of given up on the idea of pursuing the most profitable, direction. And I've gone just towards trying to cultivate the ideas that mean most to me. And I know that sounds like, I really hate even saying that out loud because it sounds terrible. But for me, it's just, my last paycheck was last July, so I'm going on about a year now. It's one of those things where I just imagine myself, later in life and thinking there was this period of my life where I had the most potential to do something. And the idea of using that potential to, startups are wonderful and, they add much value to the world. But for me, to use that potential to, help optimize the profit margins of a startup is not necessarily the best way to use your best years. And this is obviously a very personal decision, but for me, I was just really excited about going down that rabbit hole. And I think a lot of people, this is actually for me really interesting. My girlfriend's a librarian, and I see there's a whole other type of world where people just make decisions all the time, not based on money. They just make decisions based on morals or values or other things. And I think programmers, they're so good at what they do that they're able actually to cover this up really well. But I think that programmers are making decisions based on optimizing utility and optimizing for value. And I've tried not to do that. And it's brought me in this sort of, weird place where it's a year down the road and I'm like, I had whatever savings there is and it's been eaten through. But I could not imagine wanting to do it any other way. I think also it's when you think about how many open source projects there are in the world and, people approaching it from different directions, it's the thing that I'm really wary of is, there are startups that use open source as part of a marketing campaign and sort of part of hiring developers or evangelizing a platform. And I think it has you value when the ideas are so good that they can't be disputed. Like React, everyone's like, this is too damn good. Like this could have come from like any company, and we would still be using this. But it's I find it kind of disparaging when open source is not necessarily used to promote independent ideas, but more to promote agendas of startups or software companies. And obviously this is a very polemic issue. I mean, I have lots of opinions here, but I'm sure there's lots of different opinions here. But for me, I really enjoy, like, I have different maintainers that I'm like I really like, who I know have a certain following, or but they just do it in perpetuity without like any sort of like pat on the back. And I've always been fascinated by that. And also like looking back at literature and looking back at the things that really I enjoyed in my life in terms of other people's creations. I think it's those people who get to who create without like expectation that they will immediately be understood. And I don't necessarily think that. Obviously, all these things are very loaded terms because I'm talking in the context of being interviewed on a program, but like just in terms of inspiration, like just talking about other people, those are the people who have most inspired me. And so I've been trying to sort of pursue that idea of programming, and whether I succeed or fail is kind of up to the code, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely see some of your points. I think that innovation can come from many different areas, and it's a spectrum, and people do open source for different reasons. Some purer than others, and yet at the end of the day, I think what we like about software, especially open source software, that we can all see and inspect and use and contribute to, is that, and maybe this is a romantic thought, but at the end of the day, it does speak for itself. Like the product, right? Regardless of if you're a Facebook, and you're coming out with React, or you're Jack Lukic who's working on Semantic for free, without any income at all. Like your project is gonna succeed or fail to a large extent on its value proposition, and so there's this great leveling that happens. That being said, as DHH said quite often in our show with him, that marketing has a big aspect of it, and there's plenty of other factors, but there is kind of that romantic utilitarian meritocracy aspect of open source, and you're taking definitely a different angle than many people take at it. So just to borrow a startup term, what's your runway look like?
Yeah.
You got him chuckling, Jared.
No,
he wasn't expecting that one.
I actually was not expecting that one. The runway is, there's when a startup would fold, and then there's, when a person would fold. And for me, it's, I don't know if there is a runway. It's, I'll be doing this for the rest of my life because the idea is important to me. Whether or not it succeeds as a project will probably be decided soon. But it's it's about ideas, and like for even like the ideas that are kind of like unpolished and unrefined will eventually come around in terms of like new projects and sort of different endeavors. And that's how I see Semantic UIs. And I mean, I know I'm saying this at the same time. I'm like top 20 JavaScript project, top 35 overall of any language in GitHub. It's succeeding all right, and I'm very happy with the community, and the community is amazing. But other than that, it's if for some reason it needs to be evolved in a new way, then it will evolve. Like it's for me the thing that's important though is just the underlying ideas and just sort of new way of thinking about programming and kind of relating programming back to natural language. And I think also it's hard too because like once you have a name to something and you like call it like this set of ideas that I've been talking about in the program is now called Semantic UI. Like it'd be much easier for me to talk about it if it was just a set of ideas. But as soon as this is now a project that people can choose to like or not like, star or not star, follow or not follow, it like adds this whole sense of like attachment and it puts you in the realm of all these things which are harder to deal with, which is like, self concept and fitting into a marketplace. And
Well, since you
and
mentioned
that's the
the
reason it's
stars and
harder.
stuff, can we mention the stars that you got there? You got 18,473 as of right now, at least 18,473 stars and 2,013 forks and 967 people watching this thing. So it's like you said, it's in the top 25. I didn't go and look at the indexes, but it sounded like CSS and JavaScript in the top 25 on GitHub for those. So it's fairly popular.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see like I don't remember the exact rankings, but I remember there's some libraries that I really respected when I was getting in the range of, And also it's interesting to think about. There's lots of funded open source libraries now. Like you look at Meteor's last round, they raised from Andreessen Horowitz, or you look at Ionic or other frameworks, which are wonderful projects, which I love. But the caveat being that they have a bankroll now, and they can make decisions, understanding they can bankroll developers. And those people, like, that's almost what it takes to get into that ballpark. Like, once you get into the top 20s, it's like you look around, it's people who are bankrolled at Facebook, people who are bankrolled at Google, and vested startups. And so, doing the old the old model of like just doing open source development and GitHub issues and this kind of stuff, it's really hard to make traction once you get to that point without like having some sort of
Juice, so to
yeah,
speak.
juice, so to speak.
Well,
Exactly.
let's talk about that for a second, because something that stood out to me that you just said was you said the fate of this project will be determined soon. When Jared asked you about Runway, you sort of chuckled about your own personal runway, and it was mixed. It was like there was a little bit of your own personal runway, and that was indefinite because you said that this is really passionate to you and you're going to keep doing it. But then there was another side of it that you said the fate of this project will be determined soon. Can you talk a little bit about like what you meant by that? Was there some background meaning behind that?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's 2.0. I was really excited about 1.0. It was one of those things where I launched it into the world and had no concept of money at the time. I was just sort of eating through savings and being okay with it. And yeah, 2.0 is out, and it's 6 months of work. I mean, I know it's really hard to like explain what that means, but like literally just me going to an office for 6 months and working full time. And it's getting to a point where just to have the project continue on, there needs to be some sort of way to make it sustainable. And I tossed around the idea of a Kickstarter, and I just sort of felt really awkward about that concept of like, because we already have a product. It's not like I'd have to get people to bankroll a future product. And so yeah, I'm trying to figure out a more sustainable way to do it. I've asked people for donations in the past, and by the way, I want to call out how amazing the community is. Like at launch I had like a $250 donation. Like the last few months I've had between $500 and $750 in donations per month. People have been really amazing about that. And I think also that's part of like when people understand, when you have a community that understands kind of what you're doing, like in terms of not having any money coming in and working on a project like this, they're really eager to help. And I think that's the part that's like been really sobering about all this, is that like even if you don't charge for anything, like people understand that there's some sort of social responsibility to open source, like that things don't just exist in the ether. And I think when we talked last time, like GitTip was just coming out, and I think it's been really nice to see that. But yeah, I guess in terms of what you specifically asked, I think I'm gonna have to find a new financial model for the project if it's going to continue with the development that it has had previously, because you can't just not work for multiple years living in a city like New York.
No, absolutely
it's
not.
impossible.
I mean, and I kind of wish we got a bit more of the how you've done that and why you've done that out of there. I'm not sure. We've got some of the topics we want to hit up, but and we got a sponsor break to do here in a second. I'm almost tempted just to dive a little bit deeper into the money situation, because Jared, you referenced 145 with David. We talked about financing open source, and he's very against getting paid to open source. And so Jack is the exact anti DH8, so to speak, in terms of getting paid to open source, and it's his full-time thing. So there's Patreon. GitHub was there. What is it called now, Jared? There's a new version. That's a new name for it. GrataPay. I mean, have you been using that? I saw Flatter on the README.
Yeah.
So is that the primary way that people have been helping you finance this, so that you don't have a full-time job and you can work on Semantic UI the full time?
I wish. I feel like I'm one of the more well-funded projects, like in terms of the community giving back. But $500 a month is wonderful. Like, it really helps. But in terms of like being able to live
long term,
my rent is double that,
right?
And I have to eat food too, so I'm like a bit.
You have to eat? What?
Yeah.
I thought
open source bodies that takes food in.
There was like a repo you can fork and eat that or something like that. Anyways. All right. Well, let's
may sound tongue in cheek, but seriously, have you considered moving?
The traveling aspect really helped with that. Like the cost of living in Thailand or something. It's exactly. so cheap. But the girlfriend sort of makes it hard now.
There's the rub.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and use that as a chance to go ahead and pause and listen to a sponsor. When we get back, we're going to talk more about adoption. We'll begin with how you adopt or how you begin to use Semantic UI, and then we're curious to know who out there is using Semantic UI. You mentioned possibility of users, so sometimes someone adopts it and starts to use it, and then they actually give back financially to it. But let's go ahead and break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about that. All right, put them away, put them back, put the books back on the shelf. You don't need them, and learn to code by doing with Code School. Code School offers a variety of courses: JavaScript, HTML, CSS, Ruby, iOS, Git, and many, many more to help you expand your skills and learn new technologies. Code School knows that learning to code can be a daunting task, and they've combined experienced instructors with proven learning techniques to make coding educational and memorable. It gives you the confidence you need to continue past those rough, tough hurdles that you will definitely face learning to code. Code School also knows that languages are a moving target. They're always updating their content to give you the latest and the greatest learning resources. You can even try before you buy. Roughly 1 out of every 5 courses on Code School is absolutely and totally free. This includes instructor classes on Git, Ruby, jQuery, and much more, which allow free members to play full courses with coding challenges all included. You can also pay as you go. 1 monthly fee gives you access to every Code School course, and if you ever need a breather, take a break, you can suspend your account at any time. Don't worry, your account history, your points, your badges, they'll all be there when you're ready to pick things up again. Get started on sharpening your skills today at codeschool.com. Once again, that is codeschool.com. All right, we're back, and now it is time with Jack to dive a little bit deeper to figure out two things here. One, how do you use, or the other word we can use is adopt. How do you adopt Semantic UI? How can you begin to use it? Is it, and the question Jared's got here is it all in or is it toe in the water? How does it work?
Right. So going back to the analogy of Sublime Text, I'm sure like everyone has their first Sublime Text experience. So you download this new editor, you're like, what the hell is this? So for Semantic, it's npm install semantic-ui. The npm is sort of, I don't know how you feel about this, but for me, Bower and other package managers are kind of on the way out in terms of managing dependencies. npm is sort of the go-to point. One of the things that's wonderful about using npm is that we have an interactive installer, which kind of feels like installing one of those like adventure games when you were like 12 years old.
Yes.
Basically, yeah. So it asks
totally.
you questions. It's like, are you a right to left user? Do you need to choose which components you want to use, and so on. One of the things I'm actually really excited about adding in 2.1 is, are you familiar with Purify CSS?
Just by name, but not the details.
Sure. So the thing that like the first feedback I always get on having a monolithic UI framework is everyone's like, that's great, but like, what if I just need one button? What do I do? And my answer previously was just like, well, just choose from the interactive installer button. But my new answer is in 2.1, I'm going to be including Purify, which basically what it does is it goes through your HTML and your JavaScript and looks at what you actually use and then changes the CSS to only include CSS that is used in your HTML. So, if you want to use Semantic, you don't have to like worry about this, 700 kilobyte download. You can just, specify your output, your HTML folder, and then it'll go, great. Well, whenever you start using a new class name in HTML, then we'll just add that class name to the CSS.
How does that
Which
work
is
across dynamic pages?
just, yeah, I thought the same thing until I went to their repo, and I was like, wow.
It works.
Yeah, it just works. It's magic. It's like it's some special magic that someone in the open source
They
community
actually
created.
describe it as voodoo magic on their README, so
Yeah,
not
I
far
like
off.
that. That's better than auto magical, which I was never a fan of that term, but voodoo magic sounds pretty rad.
Yeah. So back to the sort of the overview. So you install it on npm. It asks you questions, what components to use, and then it goes into a folder with it has basically two folders: a circ folder, like a source folder, and a dist folder, which is the CSS you actually include in your page. And so the way it works is kind of like Sublime Text, where you download a package and you're like, well, I like 2 spaces for indents instead of 4. And so you open up a file that's a user file. In terms of semantic, it's circ/site/global/site variables. And so you open that up and you say, well, I want red to be this color. And then the build tools that are built into the project compile any change that happens, and then changes the output CSS to sort of match your changes. So if you're familiar with Bootstrap or Foundation, it's like that, but instead of it being I just import this library and just start writing like override variables, it's a more structured system, which I think actually benefits projects, because it means that if you want to start a new project and you have all these defaults already set, then you don't have to worry about like cutting and pasting parts of a CSS file that have to do with a menu or a button. You actually have a dedicated file to that. And so I think for me, this is a huge thing for HTML developer, for front-end developers, is to start thinking in terms of UI. Like when you're customizing a menu or a button, like put that in a special file called button, and then realize that when you're going to a new project, that you need to, take those particular changes, and if you want to reuse a button, then, it's there. So yeah, it's kind of a more fragmented approach, which I think people have a hard time getting used to at first, because they want everything to be in their like monolithic, index.css file or whatever. But once you get used to separating it, I think it really helps you in the long run. And it sort of makes it very easy to create new projects.
So it does sound like it is an all-in thing, but it's going to strip out the stuff that you're not using, so it's not like you get all the weight of all the components that you don't necessarily use.
And there's individual repos for each component. So if you're just like, I just need a dropdown and I'd rather use your select dropdown than another one, then you can just npm install semantic-ui-dropdown, and you got that. So yeah, it's basically, here's one of the things I've had actually a really huge issue with it, which I would be interested in talking more about, is that as open source developers, it's like you have an opinionated idea of how people should use a project, which for me is this like inheriting system. But then you just have how people actually use a project. And so you have people who use Angular, people who use Ember, people who use Meteor.
Right.
All of them have their own package managers. You have people who just want to use Browserify, and you're like, whoa, everything is compiled like from npm dependencies, and all of those are different packages with like different metadata, like different things to manage. And what's really fascinating to me is like trying to be a developer who has like, this is how I think you should use it, but then at the same time, I'm just one dumb idiot in a room, and if you want to use it like in another way, then here's another way to use it. So yeah, it's been really interesting, and the community's been really wonderful with that, where like I personally have never used Ember, but the guys who manage the Ember integrations are amazing, and like have a faster response time than me sometimes with issues, which is kind of embarrassing. But at the same time, I'm like, wow, thank you for caring about an ecosystem which I have yet to dig into.
So basically, is your policy on integrations like those are all third-party open source deals, or do you have any first-party like integrations with any of the popular frameworks or backends?
Are you guys gamers at all?
Casual gamer.
My former life.
So
Yeah,
there
exactly.
was in the Nintendo 64 days, there was a
Yes.
game called Banjo-Kazooie.
Oh, now you're right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So that was like, what I think of as like a second party game, which is like you're not necessarily a third party because like the organization that's in charge is like, all right, Rare, you're great. Like we're gonna release and like really promote you. And that's how I feel with the integrations. I'm like, it's really hard. It's for open source developers who like have a repo hosted on their own like username on GitHub and like they're trying to like promote it. So I'm like anyone who I find who's doing a good work with an integration, I try to get a semantic org repo and sort of promote it in the main repo with the README and like integrations docs and so on, just so that like they understand they're part of a community and they're like everything that you do has has purpose and value in terms of contributing to a larger good. And so I think that's for me also like that's a hard part to deal with is trying to remember your context in terms of community. I think like in the pre-show we talked about this like everything you do in open source is like it's just a commit going into the ether, and so you have to understand like where that commit fits into like the people who are using that library, like the other people who have dependencies on your project who add on to it. And so for me, I really want to like make sure that people understand that when they like take the time to make a WordPress integration or something like that that may not get a massive amount of stars on GitHub, that they're still doing really good work and that like they need to feel some praise and like some like pat on the backs from that.
So on that note, the examples I think I've found paging back through the org here is like Semantic UI CSS, Semantic UI less, and then keeping that same prefix, you got Meteor Data, Beta Docs, Ember, Angular. Is that what you mean when you talk about the integrations?
Oh yeah,
okay.
Yeah, completely. And I think this is one thing that I'm since we last talked, I've started to understand more, is that like once you just like put that team jersey on someone, you're like, all right, you're part of the team now, and like here's this official repo. Like suddenly they understand that like their work is valued. Like there's this community that will appreciate everything they do, and I think like that's such a wonderful transformation for me. It's like just watching people like go from like this is my first time contributing an integration to like I'm the maintainer of this official integration that's like other people are depending on, and that's really powerful.
What on that note, what overhead is it for you? Because it seems like you're giving a lot of the onus onto whomever really cares about it. What friction is it back onto you and the rest of the contributors to the main repo, and how does it kind of tie into the main repo and the build process and whatnot?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to like channel the right issues back to the right place. Like Meteor is a really popular integration now, and Meteor's taking off like crazy. But there's a whole new pipeline for how people build with Meteor. Like they have to have a special JSON file that like defines which components to use, and the maintainer of that project sort of decided the setup for that. And when that's not working, it's hard for people to differentiate between what's a semantic UI problem and what's like a integration problem. But I mean, for me, it's gravy because like any of this is a whole new community of people who wouldn't have used the product who are now like getting excited about it. Yeah, it's the same with like Rails or Ember. It's just one of those things where like as a developer, you choose the communities you are involved in, and there's other communities that are wonderful communities that you just don't have the the depth of knowledge to be able to help out. And just having people have your back with that has been wonderful.
I'm here on the Semantic UI Meteor repo, and I'm seeing custom.semantic.json, and this looks a lot like your affinity for Sublime Text and its inheritance that you talked about. Is that part of the layered I guess variables settings you can use for Semantic UI?
Yeah,
is that part of it, or is that not part of it?
That's actually, I would have to say, hate to say, not part of it, but it was the guy. I know him only by his GitHub username, so his actual name was Flame, who's the maintainer.
Flame, yeah.
Thank you. He's been great. He has some of the very popular projects on Atmosphere, which is the manager for package manager for Meteor. It's a system that he picked up from the Bootstrap project on Atmosphere, which I think is specifically with the way that the files are set on Meteor. It's much easier for them to just have a JSON file on the top level that they can set that then triggers the less pipeline to recompile the files correctly. You'd have to ask him.
It seems like a good idea. That's why I asked. It seems like it's keying off of what you were talking about earlier, which is why I thought it was something that was part of the official way of doing things.
No, you're right. I'm being actually a bit of a pedant because the actual project has a semantic.json file, which is basically the exact same thing. Has a different structure, and that's sort of how people decide what components to include, what the input and output directories are.
Okay.
Yeah, so everything works off of a configuration file. In terms of theming, there's a central config file that's like a theme.config file. So basically, I was sort of describing this three-tiered system before. When you download the project, the theme config has every component set to default theme. You can and anytime after you download it, you can open that file, change the theme to, you can change button to GitHub or something, or site to material. And theming is done sort of per component in the library. So you may choose to have a GitHub button, but a material, site theme. So it would have all of, Android fonts, but then have buttons that look like GitHub. And I think this is one of the things that for me is really differentiating, is that I think theming is really nuanced. Like everything is in terms of UI. And when people are like, well, I just need to make my site, look like a material design. Well, I'm like, well, a site is a lot of different things. Like a site is, several dozen UI components, each with their own, custom look and feel. And I think that once people start to think about things that way and distinguish in terms of their branding between how maybe they want a card system that looks like Instagram, but they want their buttons to look like material, and just sort of being able to differentiate that way, I think is really important. And I guess that's the difference between Bootstrap or Foundation is people are in those contexts are just used to loading one master theme file. It's everything across my website is like this. And I think also for the open source, componentized web, you have to start thinking in terms of little tiny things that fit together. And although the library is a big library of little tiny things fitting together, really it's just a bunch of small components, when it comes down to it. And every time I add to the library, it's it's another thing that you can just say that you don't want in your semantic.json file. So it's hope. I really hope that it doesn't turn into this thing that people are afraid of because they think it's too big. I want to make sure that they make the decisions really early on to sort of make it small and limit it.
Yeah, just looking at the homepage, I mean, your theming looks really, really nice. One thought I had coming into this is who's using Semantic UI? Because I know Bootstrap's out there and in crazy mass, and we see Foundation and these other, those are the two big ones. And I was thinking, I don't really know any sites using it, but as a user of a front end, it's kind of nice not knowing. As developers, we get to a point where I can spot a Bootstrap site a mile away, even if it's customized, and that's fine. Most users don't have a clue about these things, but maybe it just speaks to the quality of the theming and the way you can personalize it, that I don't actually know any sites that are Semantic UI users. You think that's true? A, and B, could you give us a couple examples to look at?
I mean, in terms of public examples, it's a bit dicey, but it's being a kind of new technology. I've kind of explained. I get personal emails from people, and it's lots of we have a startup that has gotten Series A or seed funding,
Right.
and we're using Semantic UI. And we don't have any public-facing links yet, but we just want to know, good job, and we're hoping to, the library grows. Today, for instance, I guess I can say this publicly. I got an email from someone who is head of Garmin Auto saying that they're using it and their internal tools, and just sort of we can't put this on the GitHub, but thanks. I probably shouldn't say this in the podcast actually. Oops. But it was one of those nice things where you're like,
We'll edit that right out.
okay. But it's hard because I worry about these things too, and I think part of the way Bootstrap works is that they're first to I mean, I hate to say market. They're first to market with UI frameworks, and they just sort of have a level of adoption that's kind of unrivaled. Like they're the most popular project on GitHub, like in terms of stars. Like, and I understand that, and part of me understands that that's because UI is a huge problem that people like are really concerned with solving. And so that's kind of gives me ample, fodder for wanting to grow out Semantic UI into a really, wonderful alternative for people who. Oh, and by the way, I don't know how I didn't mention this the entire time. Semantic UI 2.0 is all Flexbox. So if you're tired of Bootstrap with its old, floats for grids, it's a Flexbox grid. It's Flexbox components. It's based on EM, like very modern new things, which I think people who are making websites for IE 10 and up and sort of modern browsers are really excited about using.
On the note of Bootstrap, and I guess it's the same idea, I guess, where you think about an ecosystem where there's some need and there's so many fractures. So Bootstrap, Foundation, and all the other ones that sort of fall in line there. I'm kind of curious to your motivations of why, and you said this in the pre-call, working in a vacuum, why you continue to be, why you've chosen the route you've gone versus folding your brain space and your knowledge space into one of these other projects and just kind of going off the stars, just simply for the numbers' sake, 18,000-ish, 18,500 for Semantic UI. And then whenever you go to something like Bootstrap, you've got 82,000, 83,000, and they've got way more followers than the changelog I think will ever have. 346,000, almost 500,000 followers on Twitter. So curiosity to why you go this route versus folding some of your knowledge space into that, since you compared yourself to Bootstrap when it came to Flexbox.
I just have an anecdote actually to explain. I read the news every once in a while, and I'm not wonderful with it, but I saw that North Korea announced that they had a cure for most diseases. They had a cure for cancer. They had a cure for balding, all this kind of stuff. I forget the name of the medicine, but I went to the website that was in the press release for North Korea, and it's like, this is a BBC article, and it's like this miracle product. And I'm looking at the source code. I'm like, holy crap, this is Bootstrap. North Korea uses Bootstrap. And I had this moment where I'm like, this is it in a nutshell. It's like there's just entropy in the world. Like there's things that just exist because the world is chaotic and just selects for things and you can't really change it. And I feel like there's better things, and I want to take the things which I think in my life are the ideas that I think are better, and just really try to be an advocate for them and sort of support them and push them. And for me, I think there's we didn't talk about it much in this episode, but for me, I think there's a fundamental issue with programming languages today. I think that we're all creating programming languages that look like what programming languages look like in the 1950s and 60s, which think of things in terms of like baking a cake. Like, here's a sequence of things I need to do for a computer to understand. And we're missing out on this entire different way of seeing language, which is how we construct meaning on a day-to-day, which is natural language systems of grammatical relationships. And so for me, that idea is just so fascinating and so multifaceted. Even if I wasn't a programmer, even if I was for some reason I was an artist or a writer or something else, I would just be very excited about exploring that idea of the difference between machine learning and human learning and understanding. And so I guess that's why I do it. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the practicals, I think I'm such an ideologue. I come back to the practicals very late in the game. I'm always the last one. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. I was too busy getting really excited about this new, thing I was coding. And then, I think it'll get really serious when I can't pay my rent or I have, some other issue. But for now, it's it's just trying to chase those things.
Well, I have two quick thoughts about the Bootstrap thing, and then we'll go to sponsor break. The first one is, 18,000 stars ain't nothing to balk at, so you're
No.
doing just fine there. Secondly, that band that you found before anybody else and you loved it, and it was your band, and then everybody else, they blew up, and then everybody else knew about it, and you're like, oh, now it's not my band anymore. Semantic UI could be that band for you. It's still in the phase where, some people know about it, but you can still impress your boss. They're not going to recognize it. It's in that perfect phase where it's time to go out and give it a shot. Is that stretching that analogy too far?
I think that's great.
It's that
I wish
band
I was
that
that
only
band.
a few people have heard of. All right,
Can I be
18,000 people.
yeah, well, that's
At least those are the ones who are at least motivated enough to go and start it.
that's right. Well, okay,
Can
so
I
maybe
just,
not that band, but it's still pretty.
Can I have a little plug? Just a really tiny plug.
Sure.
We're having a launch party in New York on the 14th. There's a Eventbrite on the homepage. If you're in New York and you've heard this podcast and you're excited about talking more, I'm going to be there in person. It's going to be in the Lower East Side. I was just talking to the venue owner today. It's still TBD, but I'm really excited about it, and it's nice to just celebrate open source.
Awesome.
Well, that's true. So that's the 14th, and that would be the Monday. This show comes out on a Friday, which is July 10th. So it'll be really close to the 14th,
Yeah.
which is a Tuesday. But nonetheless,
Be
if
cutting
you're
close.
listening to this, go to semantic-ui.com and scroll down just a tiny little bit. If you got a big monitor, don't scroll at all. And it says right there, RSVP to attend, and click that button. You'll go to an Eventbrite page, and you can use Eventbrite as Eventbrite works.
Nice.
Sounds like a blast. Let's pause here for a quick sponsor break, and we come back. We'll ask our awesome closing questions. We'll be right back.
HipChat is a game changer for team communication. It helps you and your team get the information you need faster than email and reduces meaningless meetings. Teams that use HipChat are able to make faster decisions and get more work done with group chat, video chat, and file sharing. HipChat is a great solution for distributed teams by letting you take the office with you no matter where you go. iPhone, Android, Mac OS, it's all there. HipChat is easy to use and gets everyone working in real time. And right now, HipChat is offering listeners of the Changelog 90 days of HipChat Plus totally free. Get premium features like unlimited file storage, unlimited message history, and guaranteed support totally for free for 90 days. Visit hipchat.com/changelog. Again, that's hipchat.com/changelog. Get your team started using HipChat Plus today. Go and check them out.
All right, we are back with Jack Lukic, ready to wrap up here, but first we have to ask our awesome closing questions that we ask at the end of each show. First one for you is, what is a call to arms for Semantic UI? If you have the ear of the open source community, what are you asking of them in regards to your project?
Are you passionate about UI and you want to work on an open standard for people who work with UI frameworks? Come join us. We're not a new framework. We're not an old framework. We're the upcoming framework. So somewhere in between. This is really terrible.
To use Jared's analogy, the band you're about to hear of.
That's right. Let's just jam that one into the ground.
Yeah.
I liked it. I think it was pretty good. It seemed like Jack was just like, I'm not sure if it fits. I like it though. I like it.
I like it too. It's kind of a shame that you you did the party call out before the sponsor break, because here would be a perfect call to arms. And in addition is go to the party July 14th. You'll have a blast. Throw that one in there for you.
Absolutely.
Adam, you want to take the next one?
Yeah. So, what are we going to ask about the hero? What is the next question? Have we determined what it's going to be?
I don't know, man.
You got me all mixed up here. We asked several questions. I would think that what's on the horizon? This is a question from a different show that we don't ask too often on this show, and we got one other question we'll ask you too. But what's on the horizon for Semantic UI? You just went to 2.0. You're about to have this party next Tuesday if you're listening to this in the real time. In fact, it's actually a couple Tuesdays from now, because we're recording this on July 6th, so it's a week and a day away. So what's on the horizon? What's something that no one knows about? Only you, Jack, that you know where Semantic is going, Semantic UI is going. Paint the picture for us.
Sure. So theming right now requires some technical sophistication. You have to be able to like get into the build tools and like open up files. Aspiration has always been and should be achieved in the next version, which is going onto a website, being able to customize and save your UI, and then have it in the cloud. Sync it between projects, preview it with all of the different variations and styles, and then every time you download Semantic UI, you have your UI guide that is built with it. I think a lot of companies are sort of going this direction. Yeah, it's like
there's like dedicated projects just for that.
Yeah. My goal is that everyone can have their own google.com/material, but with their own style.
That's really interesting. So going back to the levels of inheritance with the classes and or not the classes, but the different, that would all tie into it. You would have, the pattern level, you would have the user level, and you would have like semantic UI level.
Oh, yeah.
That all play into this style guide that someone would actually get built on the fly for them with no extra effort.
Yeah, completely.
Very interesting.
Register for an account, change some variables, maybe choose a preset or two, and then it generates some sort of UI guide for your company, which then can be used, with microsites, in new employees, like as a brand guide. That's the sort of goal.
That's so helpful for bringing on new people to front ends, because it's helpful on both sides. The front end, bringing on new team members, but also for developers who are building what the front enders have defined as blessed.
Oh yeah.
Because once you get the buy-in, you don't want it to change, and not that developers have a habit of changing it, but they want to just be able to implement front end as best as they can, and not have to like trip over wires or whatever. And if you could provide that guide rail for them, then that's perfect.
Yeah, and none of that BTN primary. It's literally be like red button. And I know for me, talking to backend developers, like a thing that really works with Semantic UI for people is like it just clicks. Like they just look and they're like, my God, I can read this like a sentence, and like it's not like there's no actual learning required. Like it's basically the language I use to describe a website to my friends. So that's what I'm hoping for people, is that they start seeing websites not having to use a separate arbitrary language decided by developers, and that it can just sort of use a more objective, reasonable language.
Awesome. That does sound awesome. So next question for you, and the last question is, we know you've been a little bit heads down. You said you were in a vacuum a little bit working on this. But,
yeah.
I'm sure you've peaked up a little bit because you knew about React and you know about some other things. So what's on your open source radar? If you had a free weekend and you weren't working on Semantic UI, you wanted to hack on something, what's caught your eye? What's interesting to you?
I'm interested in all the React-like frameworks that aren't React. Like the idea of virtual DOM diffing has this like magicness to it that I think React solved in a very particular way. And I don't have the name of any frameworks at hand right now, but there's a lot of people working in this space, and I'm more excited about not necessarily like what React feature is, but what virtual DOM feature is, like what that means as a concept and how it fits into the browser. But in terms of if I had a free weekend and what I'd be doing, I would be embarrassingly getting back on my Meteor chops, because right now it's like my most popular integration, but I am really a layman when it comes to understanding the pipeline. So yeah, that's what I would be doing on a weekend.
Well, you mentioned virtual DOM diffing. I went ahead and plugged that into the Google, and the Google said that there is a repo on GitHub called Virtual DOM. It's by Matt Esch, and it's got over 4,000 stars. So it's definitely something that's up and coming. If you haven't heard of that may be a neat place to start. It's a JavaScript DOM model supporting element creation, diff computation, and patch operations for efficient re-rendering. And it's got quite the support level. It's all green from what I can tell, based on this image here: Android, Firefox, Chrome, IE, iPad, iPhone, Opera, and Safari. So that's pretty exhausting in terms of support.
IE6 is gray.
Oh, it is. Of course. Sure is. That is the gray one. But hey, that's a good place to start though. So
yeah.
When's that free weekend coming?
Oh man.
At the end of the runway.
Yeah, at the end of the runway, exactly. Just gotta land the plane and then we'll
So before we tail off the show, then let's plug some ways that those who've listened to the show have some interest in UI. Maybe they can contribute. Maybe they can't contribute code. Maybe they can help with docs. Maybe they can do they can't do anything whatsoever besides donate their finances if that's something that they wish to do. What's the best way to support financially your endeavors? And if there's someone out there that is a VC or is someone who would support this financially on a bigger scale, what's the best way for those types of people to get in touch and get involved?
Yeah. So I'll start off on the micro and we'll go to the macro. But basically, if you're not a developer and you're just interested in some of these ideas, we have a big localization team, like 800 people, 30 languages. But even with that many people, many languages are still less than 50% complete. So if you just go to the repo semantic.org/semantic UI, there's a link to join our translation community, and that would sort of help make Semantic UI available abroad. One of the things that I'm really actually frustrated with that I really need help with. So there's no SAS port yet.
I noticed that repo was empty. I was going to call it out, but I was like,
Yeah. So in the README, actually, I have a link to the required pull request. There's one pull request that's required for SAS to work with Semantic UI. It's allowing variables inside of @import statements. So the theming works off of dynamic import statements. If you like SAS, it's pull request 739. It's in the README. Please help us make SAS support dynamic imports. Another wonderful way to contribute, our Angular bindings are still coming together. If you're into Angular, there's a link in the repo. And then lastly, as you said, if you're a VC or if you're an angel investor, there's you can reach out to me directly, jack@semantic-ui.com. There's also a tiny microsite, investor.semantic-ui.com, that just sort of gives an overview of the project and sort of its future.
Can you repeat that last URL again?
Yeah, sure. So the email is jack@semantic-ui, and then the URL is investor.semantic-ui.com.
Okay, gotcha. So it's a subdomain off of your main.
Yeah, it's not mobile friendly, so don't try that. But it was a weekend project a couple months ago. So
gotcha. What about Flatters? We mentioned that a little bit earlier in the show. Is that a common way? Is that the way?
There's a PayPal donate link in the footer of semantic-ui.com. That's I feel is a little bit easier to deal with than Flatter, which is working off the euro. I think.
Gotcha. And so when you go to that, you do have the option to make it a monthly donation.
Yep.
You're not putting a dollar amount in there, so it could be $1, it could be 50 cents, it could be $5, it could be whatever the generous folks out there decide to put in that donation amount box. Is that correct?
Yeah, completely. And as someone who's worked this a long time, I would just love to have other developers help. So if you're more financially interested, I would love to be able to have more, as you say, runway for this. But also, if you're a developer, please help us with our integrations and elsewise.
And something else I want to point out too here at the end is you guys use Gitter. So gitter.im/semantic-org. There's also a link in the main website's footer, which we'll also put in the show notes. But that seems like a good way. If you just want to hop in and say hi to Jack and the rest of the community, then you can easily hop in and just say hello and just sort of step in and just kind of get to know people first before you commit to anything financially or even your actual work. So you can sort of get a heartbeat of the community by stepping in and just saying hello.
Yeah, it was a wonderful plug. And also, I love Gitter, by the way. I want to plug them because they're amazing and what they've done. Having Slack have like sort of closed chat rooms, and then all of a sudden Gitter came along and it's like, my God, people can organize around open source much easier. Thank you guys for doing it.
There's definitely some interesting things happening there because you can see like how, for example, your user has labeled something or some other user, Avalanche 1, not sure who that is, opened issue 2530 at certain times. So you can sort of not only catch up with people, but also see the activity of the project, which is pretty neat for that. And I'm sure anybody else out there listening to this has played with Gitter, but I haven't much yet. I've only been a Slack guy, so this is pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, I love Gitter. Yeah, if you want to keep track of an open source project, like the first thing you should do is open its Gitter. So everything's in one view.
Cool. All right. Well, Jack, hey, thank you so much for coming back. I know it's been a year and a half, and we said 1.0, but we got you at 2.0. Nonetheless, great show today. Hopefully your runway is long to keep stretching out Jared's analogies. I hope your band becomes the, American Idol or something like that. Maybe get on The Voice. That's a bad joke, Jared. Why'd you let me make that joke, man?
Oh man, you wouldn't bail me out earlier, so I'm not bailing you out now.
All right. Well, at the tail end of this show, I do want to plug some things. We have some awesome sponsors making the show possible. But we are going to be at GopherCon. As a matter of fact, if you're listening to this, we're at GopherCon right now. And if you're listening to this, you're probably at GopherCon. Well, maybe you're not at GopherCon, but if you are listening to this and you're at GopherCon, come and say hi if you haven't already yet. We definitely love hanging out with all the Gophers there in Denver, the Mile High City, as they call it. And Jared, how excited are you about the temperature there, man? I guess you're not that excited because you don't live in Texas, but
What's it gonna be? It's gonna be nice.
60s, 70s. It's like 90s, okay? Right now, outside it's 91 degrees. That's not cool.
Yikes.
What's cool is 70 degrees. That's cool.
Have you considered moving?
I'm pulling a Jack here, okay? In this case, it's a wife, not a girlfriend. We can't quite move, so... But
Yeah.
we have discussed that Denver is the city. If we moved to any other state than Texas, because it's Texas forever. But if we did move, it would probably be Colorado, and in particular Denver. So
Nice.
Omaha, did you say, Jared?
Oh, I'm sorry, I coughed.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Jared's from Omaha.
Nebraska.
Nebraska.
I can't even cough that.
I've heard that's pretty cool. Anyways, so thanks to our sponsors, thanks to Jack, thanks to all the listeners for listening to this awesome show. And Jack, we hope your runway is long, my friend. And thank you so much for coming on this show. Let's say goodbye.
See ya.
Thanks, guys. See ya.